You meowing? You showing everyone your ears? We're going to be painting some fun, easy popsicles with watercolor. You don't need anything else, just some watercolor, a brush, and some watercolor paper. Of course, as always, I have linked the supplies below. If you like anything, I'll make sure I let you know the colors that I'm using, but overall, this is just an easy one. I want you to work with what you have, so let's do it. First thing that we want to do is make sure that we have a nice sheen where we're going to lay down our paint because we're using a wet on wet effect. So you can sketch these out first, or you can go ahead and go in and just paint the shape. Now, I would usually do this with only water, but for the sake of this, I want you to be able to actually see what it is I'm doing. And so I'm going to grab just a light color. I can't really tell you what color this is because it's just like random mixtures that are on my palette. So I'm just grabbing an area that's light. And I'll go ahead and go in the middle because that way I can space the rest of these out the way that I want to. And I want more water and less paint. So I just want it to be very clear, pretty clear, but I want you to be able to see it. So I'll come in here and grab a little color, but I'm just doing this in a general popsicle shape. So this is going to be an overturn up at the top, so just like a horseshoe kind of, and then fill that in. And so I'm gonna do this until I don't want a puddle, but I do want to have a nice even sheen. So what that looks like is like this. So you see that I have some spots here that are not as covered. Adding a little more color so you can see. And it's still hard to see, but you can see the sheen. That's what I'm looking for. And now I can drop some color in. So I want this one to be pretty neutral. So I'm just gonna get like a creamy white and pull that with a little bit of lavender. I'm gonna pull that into the sides, but not the middle. So kind of the top here coming down, and then the side here. So it's not even. I have some at the curve side and then toward the bottom a little bit. But I'm gonna concentrate most of that in one spot, like toward the top, and then I want to also add an additional color, and I'll go for a brighter pink and put that in the bottom. I'm going to drop that in, enough pigment to where it really pops, and then I'm just going to kind of tap up toward the center, but then I'm just going to let it do its thing. It's going to start bleeding up, and this will start bleeding down on its own. I might add a little more of that purple color toward the top just so that it actually has that like pop that I want. But then I let the water, the sheen on there, do the rest of the work for me. And in a minute, when that has dried a little bit more, I'm gonna add a little more interest to it, and I'll show you how we do that when we get there. But now I'm gonna move on to the next one. And for this one, let's go into a trio. So I'll do a shape that is more like a cone. It's gonna be thinner. I'll go ahead and grab some more color so that you can actually see here. There we go. So it'll be thinner, and then toward the top, it goes into a little bit of a point. So you've probably seen these, they're like rocket style. So a little bit of a point, and then it curves down. And they usually have like red, white, and blue colors. But we are gonna go with like an orangey yellow palette, at least I am. Okay, so once I have that sheen down, I wanna make sure it's nice and even, so I can check that. It looks pretty even. There's a little pooling toward the left. I'm not super worried about that though. And then I can go in with a bright pigment, and I'll do orange and drop that in at the top. So I'm just making sure that I align, that I go along the edges here. And then I want to add at the bottom, and I think here's where we can make this really come to life. We can grab like a red or something more fiery and drop that just at the very top. And that will start to bleed down. And then I'll do it at the very bottom. And then I'll wash my brush off so that I don't have any more of that pigment, but I want to just drag a little bit of that color along the edges because it just kind of balances it. And then we can put a little bit toward the middle. And I just kind of pat that in. It's like a mixed flavor. And if you lose any of that yellow, you can tap some of it back in, and then the pigments will bleed, but they'll also kind of push each other here and there, so it creates a really fun effect. Now this one we can check the sheen on, and it looks like it's a lot. You can see both of them side by side. The one on the left is a lot more wet than the one on the right. So this one, it's kind of the perfect time then to add a little more variation in here. So I can grab the same color I have on the bottom, this pink, and I can just kind of drop in a few little spots throughout. And I'll do that also in the bottom, because what's happened is once it starts to bleed upward, it pulls the pigment, and so it's not as rich. And so I definitely want to add that richness back into the very bottom. And then I just like to kind of sprinkle it throughout because it adds a little depth. And then I'll do the same thing at the top with that purple color while it's still wet. You don't want it super, super wet, but you want to make sure that it does still have the moisture so that the paint has somewhere to go. So I'll drop in just at the top here to add that depth back in, and then I'll just kind of tap through on the way down to the bottom just in a few areas to let that color kind of swirl throughout. Okay, so for the next one, I want to do kind of a neutral color, and I'm going to make it kind of a rectangular shape. So it's going to be more square. I don't know if you can see this very well. I'm trying to add some color in here, but it's going to be more square with rounded edges. And I want it to be pretty light because what's really going to make this shine is the effect that we add to it afterwards. So it's going to be like one of those ice flavors that has color pop fun. Okay, let's check this sheen. So you can see I have one spot in here that isn't filled. Now, I'll be honest, when I paint, I like to have those empty spaces. I think it's just fun to have when we're doing like wet on wet. But if you don't, just make sure you check your sheen so that you know that you've got all your areas covered. Okay, so now I'm gonna get some neutral colors packed in here a little bit. And then I'm gonna grab color pop, so like colors from over here. So I'll grab a reddish pink, how about? And then I'll just drop it in, just a few little dots here and there. I'll drop some in at the edge, maybe down at the bottom. Okay, I'll rinse my brush. Now I wanna let that bleed on its own. And then I'll grab another color. I could do this like purpley color, and right next to it, I'm gonna add some more pops of color. And I would say to make these be in different sizes. So like the red is pretty small, and then the purple color I dropped in, it has quite the bloom. And that just adds interest too. So we want it to be kind of sporadic. And I like it when it hugs some of the edges, or like in a few places, because it just makes it feel like it's curving around it, but overall we have it focused in the center. And then I'll grab an orangey tone to pull that in. And how about, I'll go right under here and then have that kind of balance everything out. Toward the bottom, I think is, I always like to do a heavier base. I don't know, it's not like it's a rule. But then I think that that looks fun. Okay, so that one I can let be for now. And it will continue to bleed. Now I'm going to do a true trio. So I'll go ahead and do it on this side, and I'll do the same shape as this one. And I'm doing this with just water. So it might be hard to see, but I'll do it fast, and then you can see my sheen. So you can see it's that same shape. I have a little bit of a wonky spot right here, but I'll fix that. Sometimes I actually have to hold my paper toward the light so that I can actually see where my line is going. And then I'm gonna do this in 3 parts. So I'll choose 2 colors. I'll go ahead and go with these 2. And I'll pull in the pink first at the top. And I'm just going to go along the line at the bottom, and I'm okay if it bleeds down, because if I wanted to keep that separate, what I could have done was done just this part with the wet first and then waited, but I actually want it to bleed. So here's my first part. I am gonna keep that sharp edge, but I'm gonna let it be soft as it goes down. And then I'll do the bottom part in this like orangey yellow color right here. And it looks like I got a little bit dry right here on my paper, so if that happens, I just rinse my brush all the way and I pull the water down into the paint instead of pulling it the opposite way, because you can see now it grabbed the paint and it's doing that blend that I wanted instead of pushing it up. And then what I do here is I'll rinse my brush, I'll come in the middle like this, and I just come up to where it just touches the top, and that's kind of giving a connection between these two. And so they take their time, but they end up meeting in the middle in this like gradient kind of way. And sometimes it doesn't go all the way up, and that's fine too. I think it's just really fun to have the separation, because then it seems like we have like, I don't know, a strawberry and then vanilla or whatever white flavor would be, and then the orange citrus down at the bottom. I really am curious what everyone's favorite popsicle flavor is. I might have an unpopular choice, which is banana. I love a good banana popsicle. And I don't know if you have ever tried, I just was at a grocery store and found banana water. I bought it because I was so curious. It tastes like a banana popsicle as juice, as water. I don't know, but I wasn't mad about it. Anyway, what is your favorite, I have to know, flavor of popsicle? I'm gonna see what it looks like if I just do a line here and then a line here. So like your popsicle dips, but in color. So it just kind of looks like, what is going on here? And then when we outline a little bit, like at the bottom and the sides, with just a hint of it, it feels like this one has that dual flavor. One of the things that I like to do with watercolor is paint with a yellow base, like leaves especially, paint with a yellow base and then go in with the green, because then the yellow is not nearly as noticeable, but it's like what gives life to the color as the base. It's pretty fun. But you can see it just like really brightens things up. And then I can go in, once that dries a little bit more, and just pump in some of that pigment. Not necessarily in the center there, I just want that to do its own thing, but just along the bottom And then some of those areas that you can emphasize to make it feel like it's really packed with flavor. And then let that bleed. Okay, so this one's looking awesome. So I like to put this kind of shape in, but I like to wait for it to be dry because if it's all the way dry, then it's not gonna bleed into, like this looks nice for sure, it's fun, but we want it to be more formed. So if we wanna do any sort of form on top of these shapes, we have to wait for them to be dry. So for example, this one's not quite ready yet. So for example, with this one, so I get more pigment on my brush this time, and I'm gonna do a stroke kind of like this. So it's just gonna go up into this, and I have to turn my paper because I don't do well if I don't have this kind of motion, because I use my wrist when I do, or my arm, my elbow, when I do straight lines. It's just easier for me to control. But I start at the bottom and I just full pressure on my brush and just pull up. Now, it might be a little difficult to see depending on the color. So this is a pretty light color here, but you can see it in the middle, and that kind of just makes this look more translucent, which is kind of fun. Now, if you wanted to do something like that here, where it wasn't the stick, but it was the popsicle itself, you could do the same thing, just grab more water versus paint. So for example, if I grab this pink and I want to do it here, what I would do is I wouldn't go hard like this. I would instead rinse my brush one more time and then come in, whoops, that's not quite enough, and then come in with a little more transparency. But the reason why it'll work is because this is already dry, and so this will not blend with it. It'll be subtle. So let me show you what I mean. So I always sample it first just to make sure it's gonna work the way that I want it to. So I need a little more water here. There we go. And then I'll pull in the middle like this, and then just shape and define that the way I want to. And same thing here. And so those create very simple, elevated shaping, like shape to the popsicle stick. And you can use the same techniques that we did, where we know that these two areas are wet now. So if we wanted to drop a little more pigment in, now I can, and just go on just the edge, and that's gonna deepen just the edge of it, which adds even more depth. See how that works? Now I know that that's excessive. I did a little much, but you can always pick some of that color up. So once you have it in there, I'm just gonna rinse my brush really well, get most of that water off by sliding it on the side, and then I can go in and lift that color. And that is how I lift it. See how good that looks? And you still have everything that you just created there, just in the middle. There we go. I think it looks so good. Okay, so I'm gonna do the same thing here when that dries. I'll do this one as well, because I think that that'll be pretty. It's not quite dry right here yet, so I wanna wait a minute. This one is ready. I'm gonna do the same thing with the popsicle stick. So I'll go in and pull from about right here into the middle here. And that makes it look like it has some transparency. If it's too much, again, you can just rinse your brush, get it dry, and while this part's wet, you just pick up some of that color. As long as you're not rubbing too much, you're not gonna ruin anything that you already painted because it's already dry. So I just go over it like once or twice at the most. And then you can also go in and add depth on the popsicle stick. Sometimes I like to even pull in a different color. So like this one's already dry, but for this one, let's say I wanted to enhance it a little with a different hue. I can do that just by running a warmer color along one of the sides, and that livens it up a little bit too. Okay, now I'll add the little stick to this one in the center. If you like to work wet on wet, which I really do, you can add the popsicle sticks before they dry and then pull them up to where they hit the base, and when that happens, it will start to bloom out and bleed together, which is really pretty. I'm just adding that warm color to this so that it has some interest. And then for this one, okay, this is ready. So I'm gonna choose a color that's more neutral, probably like a real muted yellow. So let's see what this looks like down here. A little more muting. Okay, that's better. So I'm gonna get way more water. Okay, so that's looking good. So I'll go ahead and just in the middle, I'll do 2 sections here. 1 and then 2. I'm going over it a couple of times because it wasn't showing up quite the way I wanted, and as I was going up, I noticed this was still wet, so I just pulled it once more to pull some of that color up into it. Now I'm gonna do the same thing where I rinse my brush, pull off on the sides of it, and then come in and lift up what I just did, and it just kind of defines it so it's really subtle, and that's what I want. Okay, and then you can of course go in and drop in some color on the side. Again, this one's a little wet still, but I don't think I mind how it looks. And then I'll pull that popsicle stick up. I have a little too much water or too much paint, so I'm just getting it off and then pulling the paint that I've already sat down upward. And then I can come in and add that depth. Just to the edge. I will form this one a little more, so I'm gonna grab the mixture I made. It's like a pink with a red, and then I will just go inside what I did. This is a little too much paint, but every single time I do this, it's a little too much paint, so I know how to fix it. I'd rather just get the form in where I want it. I know the paint is still wet, so I still have time. Now I'll rinse that off, drag my brush on the side to get most of that moisture off, and then I'll just pull up through the center to pick up that excess paint. See, that looks great. Okay. When I started doing this technique in my blends, I started liking them so much more, and really it was initially just solving problems, but now I do it all the time because I think it looks so cool. All right, and then we'll add that popsicle stick, and we are ready for dessert. I know I made a big mess on my paper, but I'm a little bit notorious for doing that. Okay, let's see. Pull that up, and there we go. Now we have our collection of delicious popsicles. And I'm gonna go have one. I don't know about you, but I would love to see what you end up making. So please tag me if you do end up doing your own little set of popsicles, because I'd love to see them. I hope this was fun for you. Just a nice, easy project. So explore, embrace, have a popsicle when you're done. I really wanna know what your favorite flavor of popsicle is. Come here. Hi, baby.